Chapter 7, the results section. And the results is what you do with the data once you've analyzed it. And you'll also be getting a PowerPoint presentation where you'll look at Qualtrics, and I'll go through how you look at results in Qualtrics and how we will use and pull results from Qualtrics and export it into our paper in either maybe Excel or SPSS. And what you do in results, this is where you're going to talk about what information that you found and what's unique and different in your findings. The results are where you give the facts of your paper, and you want to organize your findings that were important to the study. You also want to keep it simple, and you want to look at the data that relates to your study's question or hypothesis or purpose. And you want to check and report data accurately, completely, and without bias. So you can't be adding in anything that you wanted the results to say but didn't say. You only give exactly what they gave you. And then also you focus directly on the evidence associated to your research question. So if there is random other things that you found but they're not really relating back to your question, you don't really want to focus on those things. You want to focus on the things that actually relate to your study and what your purpose of your study and what you were trying to find. Next is your steps in writing the results section for a quantitative research study. First, you will have an introduction section where you're going to restate your purpose, question, and sample population. And if you'll look in your book, there's going to be examples that show you what to put in each section. Next, you're going to summarize the important points. And this is where you give 1 or 2 brief sentences that summarize your important points and explain what you found. Next, you want to describe the outcomes of your data. That is either with statistical analysis or calculation of the numbers. And then last, you want to display findings by creating tables or charts to illustrate your data, because it's always easier to understand data if it's given in a visual form. So this is kind of an example of how you can display your data in visual form. And this actually is on page 227 of your book. And you can see another table and figure that's given for this study that was done by Women's World Daily. And this looks at the spending habits of middle income respondents and luxury respondents, and just shows you percentages of how much, like, middle income respondents, only 7% would spend $500 or more on a handbag, while 49% of luxury respondents would. So it's just a way, by doing a table or a chart, it's a way to make it easier for the reader to understand what you're talking about, and it just gives them results in a visual form that's easy for them to follow. So looking at the steps in writing qualitative research results, they're a little different. First, you're going to have your introduction section, and this is where you're going to restate the purpose, the question, and the sample population, just like you do in quantitative. Next, you're going to summarize important points, and this is where you're going to include 1 or 2 brief sentences that review important points of your data. And you want to organize your statements by themes, which we've kind of talked about in qualitative research, and by questions that were proposed in your research. And then you want to support your themes and your questions. Next, you want to give detailed examples to support your themes and questions. And these could include descriptive quotes that were given by people. You can describe visual data that was found. You can put it into the context of a social situation. You can include direct comments or concerns of different things that you jotted down in your middle notes that you wrote. And then also you can include direct comments of what people said. So an example of this, you can look on how to do your qualitative kind of write-up, is on page 230 of your book, and you can look at box 11.2. And then also at the business highlight on page 230. And The example that it gives is in an investigation of the type of retail stores where adolescents shop, it was found that students prefer shopping at a chain specialty store. This is for qualitative research. So it says, for example, subject 5 wrote. So that's how I was kind of saying that you can also give in quotes of what actual people said to back up your results of what you found. And also, if you notice, we talked about naming each of your respondents. In that example, they said subject number 5. So we never use a person's name because we want them to give us their actual opinions and everything. And if we tell them they're anonymous, then they're more likely to do that. So you can just make up a name for your respondents. Next is what you place in your appendix. And in the appendix, you can have actual data that's of what subjects said or wrote. You can put in pictures of when you were collecting your data, or pictures that go along with what you've done. So say if you did a study where you asked your subjects to look at visuals, then you could put pictures of your visuals. If you didn't put it in your actual paper, then you could put it in your appendix of the pictures that were used. You also, in the appendix, put your written logs, transcripts of oral histories, or other qualitative data that used in the body of your paper. You wouldn't put your entire transcript, but you can put pieces of it. You also can write a sentence in your paper saying that these things are placed in the appendix if people want to look at them. Next is writing the results section using combination or mixed method. So this is how you would write the results section if you were going to do qualitative and quantitative research. And first you're going to follow the directions for the steps in writing the results section for qualitative and quantitative methods. Then you're going to place it in chronological order. And then you're going to begin with your question. And when you place it in chronological order, you want to actually put your quantitative stuff before your qualitative. Then you want to explain your phenomenon. You want to accept or reject your hypothesis. And then you also want to discuss that there were no interruptions. Next is looking at figures. And figures are anything visual that is not text or a table. And it includes charts, graphs, drawings, and photographs. And if you include one of these in your paper, which y'all will do, you must talk about the figure in the paper before it's placed in the paper. So that's really, really important that you make sure you talk about it before you place it in your paper. For example, say if you were going to have a figure in your paper, what you would say before you put the figure in, you would say something like, in figure 3 is a picture of typical jeans bought by teenagers during the spring of 2012. So that's just saying how you're going to write in the little sentence before you actually put in the picture of what you're talking about. Next are tables, and they're used to present numerical data with or without text, or to explain numbers. And it shows text and numbers side by side, so you can present this data and make it easy to follow, and it makes the results very evident. And I'll show you on the next slide. It was kind of like the tables we've talked about before, how your information is side by side with your text and your numbers. And it's just really easy to follow and know what's going on. If you wrote all this out in sentences, it would be a lot harder to follow. But like this, you can look at what you found really quick and really easy. So let's go back to this slide. And tables are used with quantitative data, and they show comparisons when you're looking in qualitative data. And usually tables, they consist of columns that are used, and your data, what I said before, is compared side by side, and it's an easy way for your reader to comprehend numbers and to understand your results. Okay, skip this. Next is looking at a definition and author with date. This is just kind of another example that you could use for a table to explain something. And one thing that's good about this that it does show you is this is how you're going to give citations, where you give the year and for the date and the page number. But this is just an example of another table that you could do, which would be used with qualitative research. Next is text, figure, or table. So that's what our big thing is when you go to do your results, is how do you determine if you want to use a text, figure, or table. So a text is a group of words that become a sentence that describes the results. A figure is a model, a drawing, a chart, or a picture that represents the results. And a table organizes words and numbers and allows the reader to comprehend the results more easily. So they're each different things that you can use in your paper. And you should have at least text and figures and probably a table in your paper. So when do you use what? If you have 3 or fewer numbers or items, you should use a sentence and write it in text. When you have 4 to 20 numbers or items, you use the table. And when you have more than 20 numbers or items, you use a graph or a figure. And if you want to see an example of a figure, you can refer to page 233, figure 11.8. And here are some guidelines for preparing figures. When doing guidelines, they must relate to the content. They should be simple, necessary, and to the point. And this is where people mess up a lot on the guidelines, is on headers and footers and on tables and figures, the font must be the same as the paper. So anytime you do your headers and footers in your figures and your tables, you have to have it the same font as your paper's text. So it's very, very important when you copy and paste that everything comes across and stays the same. So that's just one thing to look at, because if you're copying it from Qualtrics, it may not come in the same font as you had originally done. Another guideline for figures is all information should be able to be understood with little explanation needed in the text. So when you're doing a figure, put everything you need in there, everything they need to understand it. So you don't have to write a whole lot about it actually in the text. They should be able to just look at the picture and understand from the actual figure all that you want them to know. And as we mentioned before, you always refer to your figure before you place it in the text. Okay, now we're going to look at some different types of graphs. So there's charts, bar graphs, line graphs, and pie graphs. And the different parts of the graphs are the figure number and the title should be above the figure. Units of measure should be labeled on the horizontal and vertical axis. Legends or a key of what the figure means should be within the graph. And symbols should be easy to tell apart. Also, captions are included to explain any statistics and name anything that needs a clarification. So that's why I said before, if you can name everything, that's great. Put as much information in there as possible so people don't have any questions, well, what does this mean? Or what is that? So first, this is an example of a chart. And they're used to present models and flowcharts, and they show relations and comparisons and distributions in a set of data. So this is actually our theory of planned behavior and the model for it. And it just shows the flow of the attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavioral control, and how that affects intentions, and in return affects behavior. And this is like a map that shows you what you're studying and how it all interrelates and what things will affect each other. And it's really great to illustrate where you're going with your information. Next is the bar graph, and they're used to show differences between groups or differences between groups over time. And this is just a simple bar graph of 5th grade students looking at what is their favorite sports event. So it's a very, very simple graph, but just to kind of give you an example of what a bar graph looks like, which you'll learn how to make in Qualtrics. Next is a pie chart, and they're good for showing percentages or proportions. So we'll be using pie charts a lot with your demographic information. And this is actually a really funny example of Fruit Loops to the max result. It's showing if you opened a box of Fruit Loops and counted all the different colors, what percentage of each color would be in a box of Fruit Loops. Next is a line graph, and it shows trends or changes over time. So usually at the bottom it's going to have the years and then kind of show the differences over time and how things have changed over time. So in our example, one thing that would be interesting to want to know about this example would be looking at cell phone use in a town. And it's interesting to me that at one point from 2000 to 2001, that women actually used their cell phone less than men, which I thought was interesting because that was the only time that they actually used their cell phone less than men. So that was kind of an interesting thing. So that's something like that you would actually talk about in your results because that's a unique finding. And last, we're going to look at photographs. And these are used to show particular emphasis. And they're a great way, actually, if you're looking at attitudes, to explain attitudes by the look on someone's face. If you use photographs, they need to have great eye appeal. And it needs to show what your consumer was looking at or what their attitude that they had. An example of using a photograph would be if you did your research on visual displays where consumers looked at pictures of visual displays and then chose what they liked or disliked about a visual display, that would be something you want to include in your research paper is your photographs. But an important thing about your photographs is they need to have great eye appeal and they need to be of high quality for publications.